Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 6, Episode 6, presented by Marketile. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Well, Steve, our content for the people today is from the NRF Big Show in New York, and it's one of the first or last interviews that we did at the show, and it'll be our last bit for the podcast. Amish Tolia, co-CEO and co-founder at Leap, a very interesting and different retail model. I don't know, what would you call it? A store as a service or store as a platform or what? Super interesting model.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, this idea of having a business that helps online only or previously online only retailers open physical stores, really fascinating. It's been growing really, really quickly. Mm-hmm. And some interesting, I've been following them for a couple of years now, but there are a lot of nuances, kind of behind the scenes things that I definitely did not understand that I think are very, very interesting. So I think it was a great interview, great perspective, and definitely a hot trend.
But before we get to that, let's talk about news of the week. So what did you call it? Vexing economic data. I mean, it reminds me of that old thing about I wish I had a one-handed economist. On one hand, on the other hand, like there's all these signals that are like blow out sales for retail, and then employment is good, employment is bad. What do you make of all this? How do you pull this all together for the listeners?
Well, I'm really hoping at some point we can stop talking about macroeconomics on the podcast, but I feel like it's so important. So this was a big week. Because we got the monthly sales number for the U.S. and the sales overall were up year over year, 6.4%, which is pretty much exactly the same number as inflation is up. So that basically suggests on average that transactions were flat. Mm-hmm. But, I guess it's just a point that perhaps everybody knows already that, averages, particularly when you're talking about a vast, complex industry, can be very misleading. So within those sales results, you had some sectors like sporting goods and health and beauty aids and things like that, which have been strong for a while and continue to be pretty strong. A couple of sectors like clothing and furniture, which had been kind of soft, seem to show some improvement. Weak categories like general merchandise and home improvement, and then really terrible numbers, significant decreases for consumer electronics and appliances. So it's kind of all over the place in terms of which sectors are doing well. But I think the big headline is sales growth is really pretty much explained by inflation. Then we also got some inflation data, which was a little bit better, more in the 6% range in the US. I think places like the UK are still seeing numbers like 10%. It's not really coming down. And a lot of folks, I remember right before Christmas, several people, I won't mention any names, but people that I think probably all recognize basically said, well, inflation is going to come down as fast as it went up. Mm-mm. And that doesn't seem to be the case.
No.
And then the job market, and this is the one that I continue to get wrong. I just assume that at some point, not that it's going to get terrible, but that it can't get any stronger, particularly with interest rates going up. Everything we learned in school and have experienced in most of our careers is that high interest rates tend to cause a significant slowdown, and we're just not seeing it. Mm-hmm. So what is really the outlook here? What's driving some of this? I think it's really hard to make sense of, other than I think the narrative now, for the most part, is maybe no recession, at least in the U.S., and but probably inflation's going to stay on the high side, which means we're probably going to get more interest rate increases. But what that exactly means is for every retailer, it's hard to say.
Well, and you're reflecting back on, or I'm reflecting back on what Ira had to say from our economist, chief economist from Deloitte, because he called that ball as well, right? He said, listen, I think employers are going to hoard people. Like there's so many intersecting points here. Like when you talk about inflation being very persistent, particularly in food, because you've got these exogenous factors. For example, you and I were talking off mic about the egg shortage that's being caused by a global avian flu. That's not going away. You've also got systematic environmental impacts on the growing of food that is raising the prices. So these, the price of food is predicted by my partner Sylvain Charlebois to go up, 5 to 7% again this year. Like those forces are still very present. Now, the good news is some of those categories, they're coming down, right? I'm not surprised that consumer electronics, major appliances. We bought so many of them during COVID. Who needs another one, right? We're not ready for a new one. So complex. It's super interesting to try and parse it, though, right?
Well, a couple things. I mean, one is the thing, and the thing that's really confusing me is we know while the job market's strong, wages have not kept up with inflation. Yep. And we're now starting to lap last year's numbers. So it's one thing, so last year we had 10% inflation. Now we got, say, 6% on top of that. So the compounding effect of how much more expensive things are going forward compared to, say, 18 months ago is pretty significant. And the things that are particularly expensive are groceries and housing.
Yep.
And those are things like, you got to eat, you got to live somewhere. So it's one thing if, furniture is particularly expensive. Well, maybe you say, well, either I put that off for a little while or I spend a little bit less money. But you can't do that quite as easily. So I think for people, particularly the more economically challenged folks, which is most people in most of the countries, you would think there would be more of a squeeze on some of the spending.
This recession chicken trend that is parallel to the pandemic puppy? People are talking about getting their own chickens and raising their own eggs. What's going on? Yeah. Which, by the way, is the recipe for disaster. Because
well, I don't want to have any chickens in here when I'm recording the podcast. I'll tell you that much. So don't expect that from me.
Nobody in here but us chickens. Anyway, it's super interesting, and I think it ties into demographics. I think it ties into the aging of the population. Again, we talked to Ira about that this is not a short-term phenomenon. The shortage of labor is not a short-term phenomenon, and we just got to be careful we don't wind up like Japan, who had such an aging population and no new people to do the work. So as you say, we're not an economics podcast. Let's bring this to what are the lessons for your business? What are the lessons? We started this season talking about the tide going out for business. How do you tie these things together and think about this as a leadership strategy expert?
Well, I guess I'd say a couple things. One is, maybe the tide's not going out so much. Maybe we were wrong about that. Maybe we will be able to have overall a softer landing, so to speak, and we won't see a recession, broadly speaking. But I think the key thing is, your mileage may vary, right? It's not necessarily the case. Like, there are clearly some big differences between the U.S. and Canada and the U.K. and Spain, and go around to different countries and see some pretty different pictures. So don't assume that everybody's going to kind of have the same experience. And I think even more importantly is tying it to your particular sector. The tech business, the tech sector definitely looks like it's in recession. I would say, the furniture business, the consumer electronics business, that has a lot of recession-like properties. It looks like it's going to be very hard to drive the top line. Other sectors, maybe quite a bit better. Inflation is the thing that's confusing, though, right? Because you can be growing sales because of price increases, and that doesn't necessarily tie to the profitability of your business, right? That sales aren't the same as profits. And we've talked a million times about the inventory glut. Like, I think we're going to see a lot of retailers reporting maybe decent sales, but not so decent gross margin performance because they've had to mark down stuff a lot. So it's really about digging into your particular business and understanding what levers you can pull and not trying to paint too broad a brush.
I don't know. It's so complex because I talked to a lot of retailers who did pack and hold. So they're not thinking that they're going to take margin hits. They just already have the stuff. So their costs have been warehousing. In other words, I talked to a couple of big retailers. Said, "Listen, I'm not going to discount it off, but I've got it now, thanks to the weirdness of the supply chain. But it's great stuff, and I'm happy with it. And in an ordinary cycle, you would exactly be having to mark stuff down. Now, we should talk about in that ordinary cycle. Let's talk about Adidas, who has been talking about writing down like a lot of stuff after their partnership with Kanye West fell apart. Well, I don't know what we could describe that as falling apart. Whatever happened to that?
Well, Yeezy come, Yeezy not go so quickly because yes, they have a ton of inventory and
like a lot, right? Like how do they build up that much? Like holy jumping, that's anyway. Talk about the number because it's just mind-boggling to me.
Oh, I think they said that if they're not able to, they're trying to decide whether they want to even try to sell this stuff, from an, I guess, image standpoint. But yeah, they could lose $1.3 billion moving through or writing off basically all this inventory that they have left over. So yeah, that's a pretty daunting number.
And, what does that even mean though, Steve? I mean, they got a bunch of stuff they don't want to sell. Who are they going to sell it to? Like, what do they do with it? Like, I think they might just incinerate it, right?
My guess is that's what they're going to do. And which, is a whole other thing. But that's a very, it is the danger as much as some of these celebrity partnerships work out great. They're fraught with a lot of danger as well if something bad happens. So clearly this was a big, big mistake. And it's a huge, huge percentage of that line had grown to be a really significant part of their business overall.
Let's talk about Bed Bath & Beyond a little bit. It may not be on the radar screen, but they shut down their Canadian stores. They went into protection here in Canada, and 54 Bed Bath & Beyond stores, 11 Bye Bye Baby stores. I'd never heard of Bye Bye Baby. Does that exist? By the way, what a prophecy! What a prophecy of naming the store that way. By the way,
I know. Bye Bye Baby. Yeah.
Bye.
Well, I think we're going to continue to see fallout from Bed Bath & Beyond. They're obviously, they got this new financing we talked about last week, and they're just trying to stay afloat and right the ship. So I think anything that takes away from kind of a laser-like focus on the stores they're keeping and is a cash drain, they're going to try to get out of it. And so, I sort of understand, they've got to really, really focus on the core, which is the U.S. and which is the Bed Bath & Beyond format, not so much the Bye Bye Baby format.
Let's talk on the other side of store openings. So we saw some interesting numbers around store openings. Store is not dead. And talk about those, just numbers that are might be surprising to some.
Yeah, well, our friends at CoreSite, who've been tracking this for a while, they had an announcement this week that for the first time since 2016, U.S. retailers opened more stores than they closed in 2022. And in fact, it wasn't even really close. About over 5,000 stores opened and 2,600 closed. So what I think is interesting about this, clearly, aside from all the comments I make about physical retail not being dead, there's plenty of store chains that, particular, dollar stores and Tractor Supply and a bunch of other companies that are not as fully penetrated geographically as they could be. They have a very successful formula. And so they're just continuing to open stores. Having said that, and there's a really good study, maybe we'll put a link to it, or a good presentation that Benedict Evans does on trends overall that talks a little bit about one of the things he gets into is still the overcapacity, mismatch of supply and demand in the U.S., just how much retail space there still is on a per capita basis. And I think that is still an issue that needs to get worked through. But, you've got this issue of retailers that have successful business models that don't need to close any stores or in fact can open them. And they've got plenty of retailers that are really struggling that need to rationalize their fleet and may go away entirely. And when I still think, and as part of my predictions this year, that we'll start to see the tide shift back more towards closings than openings. But that'll be very particular to certain retailers or formats that just aren't winning with the consumer.
Tied to that, we should talk about what's happening still with downtowns around North America, around the world. But I'm more familiar with the North American stats, and you've got some stats you're talking about for New York City. There's a great podcast on San Francisco that's talked about this, and we know that we look at the Toronto numbers, which are still only 50+% maybe back to where it was. So this recalibration of how we work is really having dramatic effects on retailers who are seeing their demands shift from one place to another, right? The demand may not go down, but it's shifting dramatically. Talk about the what you saw for the numbers for New York City and the workers that are not spending in Manhattan.
Yeah, there was an article that talked about the study that showed that New York City workers are spending on average $4,661 less per year.
Huge.
Near their offices. Now, obviously, New York City is a very expensive place. But if you think about if you go into an office in a big city, chances are you are, maybe going out for lunch, you're stopping for Starbucks on the way in, you're doing some shopping for, you're getting a kid a birthday present or whatever it might be at the store that's near your office or on the way to the train, staying there to go to a show or a movie or go out to dinner, all these kinds of things that drive your spending in a particular area because you're in the office. But given that still many places aren't anywhere close to being back to typical patterns, it got a very big impact. And so that absolutely affects where real estate is able to stay open, and this shifts to the suburban areas where people are spending more time. So we get into this a little bit. We've got Tom McGee from the ICSC on in a couple weeks, or I guess next week, and we'll be talking about that. But I think it's really, really fascinating because, you're not necessarily spending fundamentally less money. You're just spending it in really different ways in really different geographies, and that does benefit certain formats and certain locations.
Let's talk about one of our prior guests, great interview with Hal Lawton, who's been asked to stay on as CEO of Tractor Supply. Let's talk about that for a little bit, but also it reminded me of a great article in the New York Times where a couple of our guests have been, Simeon Siegel and Ron Thurston, talking about the shortage of qualified retail CEOs. Pull these things together for us.
Well, I think, Hal being asked to stay on at Tractor Supply, probably not a surprise. I mean, their performance has been amazing. I think he's definitely considered one of the best CEOs in retail today. So, really the story was just saying that his contract has been extended for several years, real vote of confidence, I think, for him and for the overall strategy. And I would encourage people, maybe we'll put a link in the show notes, go back and listen to that interview. I think one of our best performing episodes. And then, this article about the shortage or the openings that currently are in place at quite a few retailers, and how difficult it is to find that new skill set. And this does touch a little bit on one of my predictions about the need or the desire, or maybe the hope, that more and different kinds of leaders will come into these retail positions, not only diversity of experience and background and, gender, et cetera, but really this different perspective. And I think it is a real challenge when you think about, we talked about the new leadership at Kohl's, I guess, last week or the week before. You think about what some of these retailers need. Not only do you need somebody who understands product and operations and supply chain and technology, but the impact of digital, changing demographics. It's really, really, these businesses have become very different than they were, 10 or 15 years ago. And lots of leaders, I think, people listening to this have been in retail for a long time will know for the most part, the classic profile for a retail CEO is to either come up through merchandising or to come up through store ops. And, that may not be, and often isn't, enough breadth of experience to really understand what it takes to run a successful retailer. So I think it's really interesting, and we'll see how some of these big jobs end up getting filled.
Yeah, it's super interesting because if we think about people and how hard it is to find people and how important it is to keep great people, never unimportant in retail, but it's now replaced supply chain as the most significant challenge at a global level for retailers. So you better have someone that's when I think of Hal Lawton, I think of all the pictures he often posts on LinkedIn when I follow him on social media of him in the stores, him talking to the people, him connecting with the people that make it happen, right? As the old saying goes, no cash registers in head office, right? You get out and see the people. So I think that people component of being an amazing CEO is more important now than ever. So I think that really jumped out at me as well. All right, now just before we get to our excellent interview with Amish Tolia from Leap, a few words from our presenting sponsor. There are two types of retailers: those that are committed to transforming at the speed of disruption, those that aren't. If you're a retailer that implements significant changes by intuition, you may soon join the Hall of Shame of executives who bet the farm on initiatives that ultimately failed, so, maybe consider brushing up your resume. But if you are a retailer hungry for a better way to gain useful insights on the impact of your store layout, design, and innovation pilots, you need to know MarketDial. MarketDial is an easy-to-use testing platform that emboldens great decisions, leading to reliable, scalable results. With MarketDial, you can be confident in the outcome of your in-store pilot initiatives before rolling them out across your fleet. Validate your remarkable ideas with MarketDial's in-store testing solution. The proof is in the testing. Learn more at marketdial.com. That's marketdial.com.
Well, we're excited to welcome Amish Tolia from Leap to the Remarkable Retail Podcast. Welcome. How are you today?
Doing wonderful.
Yeah, we had a little issue getting you into the building, but you are here and ready to go. So we will.
It's exciting to be here.
We'll go from there. But
great energy.
We generally like to start off by having our guests give us a little sense of their personal and professional journey, and then we'll kind of dive into what Leap is about and what you're up to.
Great. Well, thank you guys for inviting me to join you guys. Excited to tell you about the story. I'm originally a Midwest guy, born and raised in right outside of Detroit, Michigan. And since growing up there, I had a fairly entrepreneurial background, and this is now about 18 years later, the fourth company my co-founder and I have started together.
Oh, all together? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, exactly. And so my co-founder and I, Jared, he's also a Midwest guy from Columbus, Ohio, and we met at University at Indiana. And that's actually where we started our first business. We were in a consumer T-shirt printing business, and we were the college kids. And 2.5 years later, we ended up figuring out how to hack our way to a scaled business model. And we were on about 46 college campuses, and we actually sold the business at time of graduation, and that parlayed into a quick stint on Wall Street as Wall Street analysts. And that was, of course, 2008. So,
nice timing.
Yeah, exactly.
A little foreshadowing there in the conversation.
My third day on the desk, Lehman had actually, Lehman fell, and I looked across the desk to one of the MDs, and I asked, does this happen often? And and he looked at me like cross-eyed and said, go back to your desk, kid. And so, anyways, we did about 18 months on the street there, and we ended up departing and leaving to start our second company, which we launched in Chicago. We built that company for about 8+ years, and it was a unique sort of marketing services business. And we got it to an interesting scale, and a lot of great insights from it, a lot of great learnings. About halfway through that company's journey, though, it was acquired by a large e-commerce company called CustomInc.com. And so my co-founder, Jared, and myself, we co-led growth at Custom Inc. for about 4 years, from 2012 to 2016. It was actually there where the idea or sort of the beginnings of Leap really came from, in the sense of one of the projects we were sort of supporting and helping bring to life was figuring out how to get Custom Inc. in the retail world, right? So
it wasn't that you were trying to create the Leap business, and we'll get into details what it's about, but it was more that you kind of backed into it because of a specific...
Yeah, you got it. I mean, we were 100% an e-commerce business where, all of our growth had come from, or mostly growth for e-commerce businesses come from in the early days, right? Search and social and direct response TV, and we needed to figure out what was the next lever, next channel of growth.
Right.
And so naturally retail became that, and we learned sort of a bit of the hard way that retail hasn't really seen a tremendous amount of innovation just as it pertains to how you think about building and scaling the channel over time, right? And so after we departed Custom Inc. in about 2017, we put a bunch of ideas on a whiteboard, and we were, somehow got back to the world of, hey, maybe there should be and can be a more scalable, more efficient version for the retail channel. And anyways, that was basically our backstory and how we got to 2018 when we launched the company.
And so for our listeners that may not be familiar, just describe what the fundamental Leap business model is about, kind of the scale and scope at this point, and then we can kind of dig into some more particulars.
Yeah, so for forever, I mean, it's, the barriers to entry in the brick and mortar channel have been pretty high, right? Lots of upfront sort of CapEx, lots of ongoing sort of corporate overhead that you need to build and scale over time. There's just very little flexibility in the channel, right? Your long-term commitments, building big teams, right? And that just felt literally right at odds with where we are in kind of modern commerce landscape. And so, meanwhile, there's some of course, inspiration in the world of, how easy it is to start an online storefront, right? I mean, just take Shopify, for example. In 5 minutes, we can license a storefront, and then really up to us to figure out what we want to sell and how we get traffic to the storefront. right? And so that was a lot of the inspiration. Could we create a version of Shopify for offline?
No, that's neat.
Right? So a platform approach, one that had some unique advantages that, no one brand has on their own, right? And I can kind of dig into that in a moment. But yeah, the short of the long is we've built a platform business that brands utilize to deploy physical retail stores, right? It could be one location, it could be many locations over time, right? And the literal manifestation of it is you can walk into any of our stores today and it's one brand, one store. So you walk into the store, it looks like a brand. It's their flag outside, but it's actually our location. We sign the lease. It's our team. We staff and we operate the store. It's all of our technology in the store, and it seamlessly integrates with their e-commerce to work in concert with their e-commerce. So, of course, their shoppers can have a really seamless and efficient shopping experience, online, offline.
I had on Saturday I was walking through 50 CEOs from Canada on a retail tour.
Cool.
And so part of that retail tour said, we're going to go look at Leap stores.
Oh, cool.
And they were just, what is this? Like, what are you talking about?
That sounds like a marketing problem.
We're on the bus and we're going to look at these Leaf stores, so we're doing a walking tour in Soho. And so we went, the first one we went to was Melbourne Golf.
Oh, cool.
And so as I said to them, then we went to Ortu.
Yeah.
And so I said, I basically explained what I know about the model. I know more of it now. Yeah. And in the stores, it was interesting. So there's some Leap documentation, right?
Yeah, right.
How to drive sales, how to do this, how to do that.
Yeah.
So I understand the platform you create,
right.
And tons of questions from the retailers. Like I said, do they set their e-commerce up? I said, no, the people who are doing this, they're generally pretty good at e-commerce.
Yeah.
They just don't understand stores.
You got it, right.
So what services do you offer them? You described, hire, lease, and all that stuff. But I saw some materials about how to drive sales and loss prevention and stuff like that. So unpack a few of those for us.
Oh, absolutely. Well, how cool that you went and saw some of the stores. And, of course, I've got some questions in return. How was your experience, right? Actually, Melbourne Golf is one of my favorite locations of ours. Yeah. Now I think we're actually in New York City, by some measure, somebody was trying to explain this to me inside the company the other day, we're probably the largest soft good retail operation in New York City, measured by store count, if I'm not mistaken.
And I think you got a Shops at Hudson Yards.
Yeah, we got
Shops at Hudson Yards.
We got a couple there. I think we're coming up to 33, 34 locations in New York City on its own. And so anyways, let me kind of tell you how it works a little bit, right?
Sure.
So if you're a brand today and, you manufacture whatever it might be, footwear, apparel, home furnishings, et cetera, and you're predominantly an e-commerce merchant, right? You sell your goods online, but of course, due to a whole host of different factors, it's getting pretty tough online, right? I mean,
the easy days of the platforms are over, right?
I mean, being able to quote unquote hack Facebook and get customers at fairly low prices, those days are kind of long gone.
Gone, yeah.
So naturally it becomes, okay, what do we do next, right? And so omni-channel is kind of the future, and naturally in our world, we sit right at the nexus of that, right? We enable for omni-channel, and so through our data, we see the brand's online data and we're the store data, and so we can see the omni-channel customer behavior and see kind of what the value is of that customer over a 12-month period or a 24-month period when compared to an e-commerce only customer. The metrics are really astounding. They're awesome, right?
Yeah. So do you actually, just a quick question, do you actually help with store location?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Right. So how it works is brands come to basically the front door of our website and they go through an underwriting process, right? So they'll tell us about their business, they'll integrate their e-commerce to our back end, and that will spin a number of different algorithms on our end, right? Because we'll look at their e-com data plus all of our brand's e-com data plus our local operating data, which is from our stores, right? I mean, when you've got 34 stores in New York City clustered between Soho or the West Village or Upper East Side, you have a lot of intelligence around what's happening on the hyper-local level, right? What are people shopping for? How much are they spending? Where are they coming from? Time of day, So you overlay these data sets, and that helps us get a lot of intelligence around, is a brand a good fit for retail in the first place, right? Yeah. Unit economics of their business, their assortment breadth and depth, right? That's part one. Part two is if we get a good amount of confidence that, hey, their brand is going to be a good fit for retail, then where do we think they're going to best perform, right? Mm-hmm. And so we'll simulate their business in one of our clusters, right? Okay, we think that this brand has the product, has the unit economics to be in a Soho location or a NoHo location or Williamsburg, Brooklyn, et cetera. Right?
Because I think Hanky Panky is one of yours as well, right?
That's right.
And they're off. They're not at Soho. They're off in
the West Village. Actually,
right?
They've got 2 locations now on the platform. One's on 3rd Street in Williamsburg, and the other's on Bleecker Street in New York.
But it has also tended to be the case that there are certain parts of the country, right, where these new DTC brands tend to be, right? So that helps you in terms of knowledge and focus.
Yeah. So actually, it's part of our strategy, to be honest. I mean, it's a core part of our strategy to cluster our store locations. Yeah. Right, and when you create a lot of density, you just create unfair advantage for yourself and the brands.
Sure.
Right. I'll give you a couple examples of what that really looks like. So when you create density, we can cross-pollinate our shoppers across all of our store locations. Oh, because you bought this hoodie from Malbon Golf, you might want to pair it with this denim from Fred Siegel, right? And so we can cross-pollinate to shoppers based on their shopping behaviors. And actually, it's a fun stat. Across all of our locations now, network-wide, we're just north of 100 locations, 60 brands on the platform across the markets where we operate, 11 markets we operate. In 2022, about 10% of total network-wide sales was a direct result of our marketing efforts, Leap's marketing efforts. That was a first-time customer to the brand.
Right. Now, unpack that a little bit for me. So from a customer experience perspective, I go shop at this great golf. I have no idea Leap is behind it.
Yep.
And then I get an email about another store that's connected. How do you smooth that transition? That could be jarring if you're not careful.
Totally. Right? So you could shop at, call it Malbon Golf, powered by Leap. And so in the store experience, there's some, as you called out, right, there's some subliminal messaging that allows the customer to know that actually Leap is the merchant, and you happen to be in a Malbon store powered by Leap. And actually, at the time of transaction, I don't know if anybody purchased anything, but we should probably take them back. We
were moving too fast to get in the nuances of these tours. If they start buying stuff, I'm dead because I can't. I got to keep them moving.
No, I get that. No, so the actual transaction.
They love the golf. They love the golf club covers, though.
Yeah, they're cool.
They're
really cool.
I gotta say.
So the transaction, actually, when you look at your credit card statement, you'll actually see Malbon Golf powered by Leap.
Okay.
Right. And so at that point, we start building kind of the awareness with the brand, et cetera, et cetera. And so, there's some cadence. It's like T plus 7 days later, 14 days later, 21 days later. You'll get some messaging. Hey, because thanks for shopping at Malbon Golf in Soho. Check out other awesome modern brand stores in the local neighborhood. Right. Or, if we have, then there's versions of that where if we have enough buying behavior of a shopper, we can actually take them down a journey, which is, okay, we understand enough about your buying behavior. You buy a lot of, athleisure. You might want to pair it with, shoes that fit really well. Oliver Cabell with athleisure, right?
And for the merchants in the stores, loss prevention, you hire the people, all those, there's tactical things. Because the people it seems to me that the brands know pretty well, plus or minus e-commerce. It's the hard parts, as you know, about running stores, right?
Yeah.
How do I? What does the loss prevention do? How do I even handle that? What do I do to drive sales and all that stuff? You provide some of those guidance,
absolutely,
to the associates. Seems like a big value.
So everything is now standardized, right? I mean, it's there's SOPs in place from pretty much anything, right? So from how we receive inventory, right? And how a brand should be thinking about hang tags, right? Everything's done to our requirements because it's just the only way we've been able to scale a business, right? And so like LP, it's pretty standard. I mean, we're not a big box retailer, right? We're not talking about 200,000 feet across X number of locations. We're talking about these are 1,000-foot formats.
They're small. Some of them are very small.
Right. And I think our average square footage across our 1,200 locations is about 1,200 feet, give or take.
Okay.
Right. So they're small locations, and assortment-wise, we're talking about a couple thousand units of goods, between front of house and back of house. But nevertheless, I mean, there's of course SOPs in place on how we manage a bunch of things like LP, right?
Okay.
Right.
When retailers come to you or these brands come to you, is it generally the case that they have very big aspirations for store growth and this is their way to kind of get started? Mm-hmm. Or is this more kind of we'll probably just have a few stores so it's not worth it? Because imagine some companies are like, well, they'll use you until they figure it out, right? And then they'll hire people as opposed to, we're never going to get, or chances are we'll never get really big in physical retail. The Warby Parker versus the, I don't know, some other stores that have one or two kind of marketing locations.
A lot of our aspiration with Leap has always been, trying to figure out how to turn the channel into as much of a performance channel as you possibly can, right? You can flex it up and you can flex it out based on performance, right? And so there's a number of different advantages that we bring to the table that no one brand would get on their own, irrespective of them figuring it out, quote unquote, on a four-wall basis, right? So the data network effects, right? So we have a ton, all of the intelligence we have from a national perspective to a local perspective. No one brand has that on their own, and so we can make better decisions, right? Where to put a brand from a location perspective, what to assort in the store, how to think about marketing, how to think about operations, etc. Right? That's part one. The customer cross-pollination is part two, right? The density that we create is part three. When you create a lot of density, you just have economies of scale. And so brands become benefactors of economies of scale they wouldn't have on their own.
Sure.
Right? So a number of these things add up to, not to mention the fact that they don't have to build the corporate SG&A, the overhead, they don't have to sign the long-term leases, they don't have to put up the CapEx.
Yeah.
So when you take all these things into account, it's actually, they don't just launch one store with us. They actually think about how do we end up scaling this thing on the Leap platform over time that works for both parties, right? Works within the platform constructs and works for their business. And so we've actually found the inverse. Some of our brands now are, they started dabbling their toes into retail on their own. Yeah. They realized, oh, wow, this is really tough.
Is harder than
we're not built to do this.
Yeah, it turns out it's not quite as easy as it seems on the outside.
And then they found Leap, and now next thing you know, I think one of our brands went from 0 stores to 10 stores in 1 year, just last year.
But you got me thinking about short term and thinking about, okay, listen, it doesn't work for everybody, right? Yeah. So how short term is short term? Can I sign for 1 year? Can I sign for 2?
Yeah.
And do you evaluate and say, listen, love your brand, this isn't just, you got a piece of the action, right? You get a percentage of sales. So you've got a business model as well.
It's an aligned business model.
Right, and you basically say, listen, not working out, so, we're going to part ways. And is that kind of sunset of that deal is kind of based on time? How do you think about that?
So there's kind of two parts to this. One is, naturally, we're underwriting and launching brands on the platform that actually think about retail at a commercial scale, right? So that's a big piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
We want to launch and operate brands that are thinking about getting to 4 stores, 10 stores, 50 stores, 100 stores, et cetera, over time. And so now, in our world, if we deploy a brand into a particular location, and let's just say hypothetically, it wasn't working that well, right? They're using our data, they're using our merchandisers, they're using our marketing capabilities, and they're effectuating change to try to drive lift in a store to see improvement. And let's just say 6 months pass by and it's still, you're not really growing, right, past a certain threshold on a monthly sales level, monthly sales perspective. At that point, we think about, okay, maybe it's probably not a good fit for this location, right? Okay. And so it's generally a conversation, right? And
it's not an email, right?
Right, exactly. And we can pull the brand out of that location and we'll deploy another brand into the same location. That happens very quickly. It happens within 2 to 4 weeks max, right? So we have that kind of flexibility from our modular fixturing systems to the demand liquidity from a lot of different brands that want to be in these premium locations, right?
So some of our listeners may be familiar with neighborhood goods. We've had Matt on the podcast recently. Showfields. I know there are a bunch of pretty good-sized pop-up agencies. Do you consider them competition, or just sort of compare and contrast what you do versus what those folks do?
For starters, we love anybody that's doing something fun and interesting in the world of the future of retail. But for those folks, by no means. Actually, our brands are users of the Leap platform and also use Showfields, or they may use neighborhood goods. It's incumbent upon brand building organizations today to think about growing their points of distribution.
And there was one brand I thought that I specifically read, they said you could find us both in our own store and in Showfields, because there's multiple points of presence, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
Listen, it's a really cool model. Yeah. So if people want to learn more about it, go to the website. But are you a LinkedIn guy? Like, talk about that.
They can reach me on LinkedIn. They can send me an email. They can come to our website. We're open for business. The business is growing incredibly fast.
Yeah.
And
it's typically in these things that the last question is, what's next? But it seems, basically, not to put words in your mouth, you basically got the model. You're just gonna go scale it and spread the word. That's next, right?
You got it. Right.
All right.
The business has been around for 4.5 years, and we're fighting to keep up every day, right? We've got a lot of demand from some great brands, and we're went from 2020, mid-2020 with a dozen locations to in 2 years, literally 2 years, 100 locations and 60 brands. And so now it's all about quality and
Sure.
but yes, we will be continuing to scale the model, continuing to launch new brands, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, fantastic. Well, listen, thanks for joining us here at the NRF show. We're sitting here in the Market Dial booth, so we had a bunch of fun with your plexiglass behind you.
Yeah.
But this is
great. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for making the effort to get up here. It's a big place.
Don't sweat it.
And look forward to keeping in touch, and best of luck as you move forward.
Thanks a lot. Much appreciated.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, your favorite podcast platform, so you can catch up with all our great interviews, including Organized for Growth, our interview with Satish Mahatra, CEO of The Container Store. New episodes of Season 6 presented for another season by our friends at Marketile will show up each and every Tuesday. And be sure and tell all your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us.
And I'm Steve Dennis, author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker and producer, and host of a series of retail trade podcasts, including this one. You can learn even more about me on LinkedIn, and you can catch up with Steve and I in person at Shop Talk in Vegas, March 26th, and a month later in Barcelona at the World Retail Congress, April 25th. Until then, safe travels, everyone.